Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirsty Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts.
Hi there, welcome to our summer series. This week we're chatting about slow travel and the art of train travel. First up, I have a chat with the author, travel journalist and co-founder of slow and sustainable travel platform Life Unhurried, Celeste Mitchell, about why we're all looking to travel more slowly, what it means for your travelling experience and where you can go to do it. And our second interview is with train aficionado Tim Richards, so stay tuned for that one.
Welcome to the show, Celeste.
Thank you so much for having me, Kirsty.
So great to have you on The World Awaits. Let's start by tell us a bit about your background and how you got into travel.
Well, I studied journalism and I made my start in magazines down in Sydney. So I was there for close to a decade, mostly in youth titles. So I worked on things like Girlfriend, TV Hits and Total Girl. So my world was all, following the tween stars. So it was quite a bit different to what I do now in travel. But I wanted to move back to Queensland and I just thought, what am I going to do there? And the idea of working for Tourism and Events Queensland was really appealing. And I managed to score a position in the publicity team there. So I actually worked for a few years in tourism PR, which really showed me the ropes from that side of the fence. And when I left to go freelance in 2013, I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could, maybe write one travel story a year, just in amongst other writing jobs. And funnily enough, I was speaking with the editor of Escape at the time, and he offered me to go on a trip to the Cook Islands. And so I actually flew to the Cook Islands the day after I finished at that job, and I've been writing for them ever since. So so about 10 years now, I've been working as a freelancer, and I write regularly for Escape, Australian Traveller, Travel and Luxury in the Australian, Explore, and lots of other magazines as well. But I've also, during that time, it's not just all travel stories. I edited the blog for Tourism and Events Queensland for about 5 years. I did a lot of rewriting website copy and brochures for companies like Top Deck Travel. And also at one stage, my husband and I opened a co-working space on the Sunshine Coast where we live. So was very busy and also traveling a lot during that time.
Amazing. And isn't it funny how quickly the goalposts change once you get that one story? It's like, that's not enough anymore. So tell us why you decided to launch Life Unhurried, and tell us a bit about what it's about first.
Yeah, sure. So Life Unhurried is basically an online platform that is all centered around slow and sustainable travel and living. And basically it's, as you can kind of tell, it came out of a space of just being completely busy and overwhelmed. And it's two friends and myself. We'd sort of had the domain name for a couple of years, and we just thought it's such a great name. We love the concept of slow travel. We'd like to do something for ourselves at some stage. And I was in Mexico, actually, because my husband and I did an extended trip after we got married and spent 3 months in Europe and 3 months in Mexico. And I was still working the whole time, but I gave myself a week off. And it was like during that time, I just thought, right, we need to make a start now. If we don't, it'll be another, 5 years down the track. And so I came back from that trip in 2018 and we made a commitment to just start working 1 day a week on it together. And we just basically set out to create an editorial platform. We started writing blog posts and creating videos focusing on beautiful slow stays and experiences that really resonated with us, and, conversations with people that were choosing to live a life more unhurried. We always knew that we wanted to include an accommodation directory with the site. And so in mid-2020, we launched Slow Stays, and that is basically a curated collection of properties from around Australia, but it will be eventually the world. And it's basically designed to save travellers time. So they know that rather than trawling through Airbnb for hours or trying to find these really special stays, they can come to Life Unhurried and they'll find the types of properties that tick all those boxes for a really slow, conscious stay. So we either seek out those properties or they apply. And then we assess them on a combination of factors that tie back to that slow ethos, as well as the sustainability measures that they have in place. And then rather than it being a booking site, we refer those potential guests directly to them so that it sort of cuts out that commission that they might pay on the bigger OTAs.
So cool. And it's such a great name, Life Unhurried. So how did you find those very first properties to feature? Did you just because you liked staying at places like that, or, and how did you know? Because you can't stay at every place that you're going to write about or feature, obviously.
No, well, yeah, I mean, it purely come from spending a lot of time on trawling Airbnb ourselves and Instagram and just looking. I guess I'm fortunate in the type of work that I'm doing. I'm coming across new properties, but it was really seeking out the lesser known and the new, unique stays that were popping up at the time. So, if we rewind back to, that 2018 period, it wasn't as common to have, the bubble tents and, there's one place we went to because you stay in a reused grain silo, or, staying on a houseboat or a little off-grid cabin in the woods. And so we were trying to find these really interesting places and then, getting in touch with them so that we could go and help to tell their story. And so that was some of the first Slow Stays videos that we did. And that was that created the basis for it. And it actually went through, as well as doing the directory on the site, we have also published a coffee table book, which is called Life Unhurried as well. And so within that has 50 properties from around Australia, and it has a real variety of those types of stays. Some are old train carriages that have been reworked into beautiful stays, or, vintage caravans. There's a whole sort of different mix of styles.
And what a great way to collate. And like you say, because you were probably a little ahead of your time, weren't you? Were there many in the beginning when you were looking around? Were there many, or has it kind of just taken off in the last sort of 5 years?
There was certainly some that were already becoming well known, a few properties around Australia, but nothing like the scale that we see now. Obviously, the pandemic had a huge part to play in that. As I say, we launched the directory in 2020, and the world had changed significantly. And the one benefit of that is that people started looking inwards. They started looking at where they could travel at home, and they also wanted to support those smaller rural and regional areas. And so, that not only delivered travelers to those existing stays, but it provided a lot of people with inspiration for creating their own stays. And so certainly in places like Tasmania, we've seen just an absolute explosion of new slow stays, new Airbnb properties that have opened up in the past few years. This past 12 months has probably been more challenging for some of them because, suddenly people can travel overseas again. And so it's, looking at how you can have that experience at home, but also the exciting thing for us is now looking beyond and, to some of the destinations internationally that we want to showcase where people are seeking out a similar style.
So explain a little bit about what a slow stay is. So obviously off-grid is pretty obvious, and you've got lots of sort of unique stays, but what makes them slow stays?
Well, yes, off-grid, it doesn't necessarily need to be off-grid. We sort of separate it down almost like two columns. So we have like the slow stay, I guess, boxes that it can tick, and then the sustainable column as well. So, not everyone ticks everything on both columns. It's looking at, how weighted it is across both. So some are completely off-grid, they're eco-certified, they're doing just incredible things with working with local First Nations communities, totally self-sufficient on their own property type of thing. And then others, may not tick all of those boxes from a sustainability point of view, but, they're in a really remote location, or they're really supporting the local community, or they're in a beautiful nature setting where you can have a truly, relaxing slow stay. It's ultimately about places where that you can go and you'll be able to switch off and really reset, and there'll be a varying degree of those elements that make it a more conscious stay.
And are you seeing more and more people wanting this? I mean, we touched on it sort of a little bit before, but obviously post-pandemic, people are seeking, to go back to and realizing how busy and rushed life was pre-pandemic. So things have changed drastically. But what are you seeing? What sort of things are people looking for, and are there specific geographic areas that people are maybe focusing more on?
I think the regional areas are still very hot. Like, we see that people are still traveling, particularly in places like regional New South Wales, all along the coast. Tassie might be slightly quieter in the past 12 months. But I think people are still, not everyone can afford to go overseas at the moment. And, like, as much as we would like it to be that people are totally driven from a sustainability point of view, I think what is more driving it is wellness. And that's a big part of what, the reason for wanting to do focus slow travel as well is it's actually about mental health and about well-being. It's about realizing that we all live really busy, hyper-connected lives, and it's really important to take moments to get away and to have that time to reset. And so places that facilitate that, I believe, are really important, and increasingly so. And that's where we're starting to see trends like stays that now have their own private sauna, perhaps, or, they're working with a local chef who's able to create a really beautiful, nourishing, organic meal while you stay at the property. Or, they're really working with local suppliers to provide, guided meditations or, different experiences like that. So I would say when we've surveyed Slow Stays owners, what they're seeing from their guests, it is about staying longer and looking after their health and well-being.
And what are some ways that people can genuinely sort of slow the pace and be more sustainable when they travel?
Well, I think, first of all, for me, slow travel is a mindset. So it's something all-encompassing. I believe that when you slow down, you can see more. So, one example of that is just maybe going to one place and staying longer instead of trying to go to 3 different places in a week. But it's also about the food choices that you make, the people that you meet along the way. And I think it impacts the travel experience immensely when you purposely slow down. And that's why we're seeing those trends like digital detoxes, phone-free travel, the resurgence of rail travel now, because we're all really craving that slow time. But from a practical point of view, and we actually have some of these tips in the book because, as silly as it sounds, it's like some people actually really struggle to slow down. I think one of the biggest ways is to stop being so connected to devices. Constantly following that jam-packed itinerary of hotspots that we've saved from Instagram is, and then they're documenting every moment along the way. It's no wonder that people come home needing a holiday from their holiday. So it's just things like, read a real book, keep a journal, talk to each other at dinner rather than being on your phone. You could even look at doing like a phone-free day within the trip, or even if it's a phone-free hour, just making a conscious choice to disconnect and be more immersed in the place where you are. Food is a big one. Like I said, we all know about the slow food movement, but there's so many benefits for, shopping at local markets, supporting, small businesses and cooking and eating mindfully. You're not just grabbing food from, the takeaway as you rush around. So you're cutting down on your single-use plastics and you're having a more enriching experience as well. Getting into nature is obviously a huge one. Anything that you can center around nature, like multi-day hikes, are obviously perfect for that. Because we all know that appreciating nature, it leads you to protect it. So if we're putting that at the forefront, we're making conscious choices along the way already. And I think having kids has actually taught me this is just about like not setting your expectations so high. Like if you have one thing that you are going to, one thing planned for the day and you get to do that, then that's amazing. And just have some space to see what else happens, and slow it down that much where you can just be a bit more free in your itinerary.
It's such good tips, and so many of those things you can do in your day-to-day life. You don't even have to travel. That can make a real difference to your mental health, like you were saying. What are some of the best places that you've traveled, or some of the best experiences that you've had in slow or sustainable travel, or a bit of both?
I've been fortunate that there's been quite a few, especially in the last few years. One that really comes to mind recently is a place called Ecopia Retreat, which is on Kangaroo Island, off of South Australia. And the special thing about Ecopia is it's one of our properties that is completely off-grid. It's also a rammed earth. They have 2 rammed earth villas. And so, that has been hand-built, with earth from the property, and it's not only luxurious inside, but it's set on a private wildlife conservation. So you're there, and all you need to do is step outside, and you're in this beautiful native forest with kangaroos and wallabies, koalas in the trees. There's glossy black cockatoos flying past. But inside you light the fire. There's a beautiful bottle of local wine from the island. And they've got these gorgeous big windows, so you can still have that immersion and be connected to nature while you're inside. And so that was such a big part of the entire Kangaroo Island experience for me. I know that you can go into the national park and the places where everyone else goes, but this was like a really private, special experience in the centre of the island.
Oh my gosh. Well, it sounds amazing. I want to go there. And we'll put a link to that and links to your where people can access that from your website in the show notes too.
Thank you.
Tell us, our last question we ask all of our guests is, because unfortunately we're running out of time, is tell us the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to you on your travels.
It's not too out there, but the main one that sprung to mind for me was that I've always wanted to live in New York City. So for my 30th birthday, I booked an apartment on the Lower East Side for a month. And so I could just spend a month there and feel like I was living there. But it happened to be when Hurricane Sandy hit. So I was there during that experience, woke up, trees down everywhere, people scrambling to buy candles from makeshift roadside stalls. And my apartment had no power or hot water for 5 days. So basically all of the plans went out the window, and I just spent those 5 days kind of wandering the streets, the mostly abandoned streets, hunting for power points, huddling outside the Starbucks stores, trying to get the Wi-Fi to call home. And, it all fell apart, but it was really one of the most memorable parts of the trip, like cold showers and all.
Well, it certainly slowed you down, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, look, it's been so great chatting with you. And like I said, we'll put all the links in the show notes. And I look forward to keeping up to date with what's happening with Life Unhurried.
Thank you so much.
That was Celeste Mitchell talking about how to slow down when you travel. For more information, see lifeunhurried.com. And next up, we chat with train aficionado Tim Richards, who loves nothing more than rail travel. He shares some of his favourite train routes, talks about the beauty of sleeper trains, and also how to get the best value out of your train ticket.
Tim, welcome to the World Awaits.
Good to be here.
Now, you are a mad train person. You don't define yourself as a train spotter, though, do you? Is there a technical difference?
Train spotters, yes. No, nothing wrong with a train spotter. They go out and sort of stand by the line and tick off the numbers of, particular locomotives or whatever that's going past. That's not something I've done myself, but, all credit to them. There is a nice little spot just past North Melbourne train station where you can stand, a little alcove that's been put in there where you can stand and see the trains come in. So I'm sure they're out there.
Right. Do you mean it's actually it was designed for train spotters?
I believe so. It was some years ago. You'll see it if you're coming in on a train, sort of past North Melbourne. Look up to your left as you're going towards Southern Cross Station, and you'll in Melbourne, and you'll spot it. So I believe it was put in for that.
Look, coming into Southern Cross Station, I mean, that really is the beauty of train travel, isn't it? It's arriving at a destination. I mean, and you've got these great cathedral-like stations around the world. How did you get into train travel?
Oh, I think it's it's a bit like what Hemingway wrote once about someone going bankrupt gradually and then suddenly. I really didn't, when I started travel writing 20 years ago, I didn't really do that much train travel. I was looking back on my website where I have all my, published articles logged. It wasn't for some years before I started sort of getting on trains. I think the first really long one I did was the Canadian, which goes from Vancouver to Toronto in Canada. And then after that seems to pick up. So I've always liked trains, though. Certainly that desire to do train journeys was there. But somehow professionally, I sort of became a bit of a go-to person for trains. And obviously I seek them out now. I look for train trips. There are amazing times. It was like, it was about 10 years ago. I had to get from Hungary to Poland, and I actually chose a bus when I could have chosen a train. I would not do that now, I must tell you.
Absolutely. I'm totally with you on it. You've trained across so many countries, though. Which do you think is the best country for train travel?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I suppose if we're looking at regions, obviously Europe is, obviously well set up for rail travel. There are good networks, particularly in the West. There are a lot of sleeper trains, which are coming back into fashion. There's high-speed rail quite plentifully in parts of the continent. So obviously you can get a lot of experience, and including some lovely heritage trains and some classic scenery, obviously, in that part of the world. I find North America is not bad, though, because Amtrak, which runs the US trains, they've got some really appealing routes that are really long, like 2-night sleeper train runs, which take in the Rocky Mountains. The California Zephyr, which runs from Chicago to San Francisco, takes in the Rockies, the Colorado River, then the Sierra Nevadas the following day. So some of those rail routes in that continent can be really impressive, even if the trains aren't as frequent. And obviously in Asia, you've got some great choices as well. In Africa, I haven't done much train travel in South America, but that's another option as well. But yeah, so some of them are, say less often, or they might be what we call rail cruises, which is the, luxury options like our Indian Pacific and the GAN. Those are a bit special. They're expensive usually, but they're impressive. But obviously you have the regularly scheduled trains, and the ones that are sort of in between, like the Glacier Express in Switzerland, where it's obviously very famous with tourists, but it is a regularly scheduled train as well.
Absolutely. Some of those luxury long-distance trains, it's interesting that you call them train cruises because, it's a perfect description, like the Blue Train going between Pretoria and Cape Town, and then you've got the most famous of them, like the Orient Express from Venice to Paris, or the Flying Scotsman. They've all got such great histories behind them. But as you say, they are luxury. They are luxury long-distance experiences. If you don't have pots of money, how can you still get a great sleeper experience? And I'm going to ask you a second part of that question, which is, can you actually sleep on a sleeper train?
I always say, even though I love them, I say if you sleep well on a sleeper train, you must be dead. Because, obviously you're subject somewhat to the bumps and grinds of however well maintained the track is. And the famous one here, or the infamous one perhaps, is the Indian Pacific from Sydney to Perth. A wonderful train, great rail cruise experience, but everyone going that direction always complains about the first night in New South Wales because they tend not to look after their long-distance rails very well. So it's bumpy, and then the other 2 nights through WA and South Australia and then WA tend to be much smoother, and you get a decent sleep. I think you can, though. I just took the night train down from Sydney a couple of weeks back, and that was okay. I got a bit of a sleep, and it sort of reduced that long journey down to something nice and straightforward. So yeah, it can be done.
They're all very romantic, those long sleeper trains that here in Bingham in Peru, which I've caught, which goes to Lake Titicaca and then ends up in Cusco, which is the feeder town for the ruins of Machu Picchu. I slept like a baby on it, but I don't know whether that's because I had a little detour in the bar car beforehand, or the fact that it's quite an expensive experience, and you really want to have a good snooze on those sorts of things. But if you don't have pots of money, can you suggest any long train journeys that you can do on a budget? Something like the Trans-Siberian in second class used to be the holy grail for train aficionados, which was Moscow, going right through right across the entire of Russia. Are there any others you can suggest while that one's out at the moment?
Yeah, it's a pity though, isn't it, with Putin invading Ukraine, and who knows, I may never get on that one in my lifetime because I haven't been on it yet. If he stays in power and it's off limits. But anyway, let's wait and see. But certainly, I mentioned the Amtrak ones, the US ones. There's quite a few long ones there. There's the Coast Starlight from LA to Seattle that goes every day in both directions, and there's the Empire Builder, which is Seattle across to Chicago, which you can stop off at Minneapolis, for example. I did that one a couple of years ago. They're great. They have a lot of scenery, either coastal or mountains, or often both. And they can be affordable. Depends if you want to sleep it. It's dynamic pricing like the airlines, so you need to jump in and book it, well ahead. But it's within budget, I would say. It's not fancy, the Amtrak experience, but it's comfortable enough. They've got these little rooms called roomettes, which are very compact, but they do the job, and they have, kind of cafe-style dining car kind of food, which is fine as well. And the Canadian trains are similar. There's some nice long ones. They've got a nice train in Canada that goes from Jasper in the Rockies across to the coast, but way up north, a place called Prince Rupert, which is almost to Alaska. That one only runs every couple of days, but it's a cracker. It goes between the Caribous and the Rockies at first, and then ends up following this wonderful river called the Skeena all the way down to the Pacific coast. And that's a bit less known, that one, but I would recommend that one for its scenery. I suppose in Africa, for example, in Egypt, you've got the sleeper train from Cairo down to Luxor, Aswan, those sort of destinations. That would be a nice one as well, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do come at a budget on those ones. I mean, you wrote about, I love it when I read about your travels on the US trains, because they have such great names, their train journeys. It really goes back to that whole golden era of train travel, doesn't it? That period from the 1900s to the 40s.
They do win for train names, because a lot of those train names were kind of derived when Amtrak was formed in the 70s to take over all these private railway lines, passenger railways, which were failing. It borrowed a lot of the names, like the California Zephyr. There was a Zephyr train before that. But the absolute winner is the one that goes along the south from LA. It goes through to, I'm trying to think where it ends. It goes through to the deep south. And it's called the Sunset Limited, which is absolutely brilliant. That's such a good name for a train. But so they when they do have evocative names, don't they? The ones in Canada are a little bit more straightforward. Is the Canadian, and the one that runs from Montreal right round to Halifax, which is another nice one actually. That I'd recommend that one. That's just called the Ocean. So they're a little bit simpler, but we do have some fancy ones.
That's quite prosaic, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in one of your books about train travel, heading south, you have connected up a series of trains of the smaller train routes in Australia, and there's some fabulous names there, aren't there? Is there the Savannah and things like that?
Oh yeah, there's some funny ones in Queensland. There's the Gulflander, which is this cracker of a train way out northwest Queensland, very remote, almost to the end of the paved roads. And it's what they call Gulf Savannah country. So it's very flat, very sparsely treed, if you can picture that. And there's a little town there called Normanton, which was supposed to be the new Darwin back in the 19th century, and it never made it. And it's actually it's an example of a town that they thought would make it big and never quite got there. But so it does have a few grand bits and pieces of buildings, but it's very small. Anyway, there's a line that runs from there to an even smaller town called Normanton, where there was a gold rush in the late 19th century. And there's a train that's run between it a whole time called the Gulflander, and it's really just like a truck engine inside, two carriages. And it was sort of necessary right up until the 80s, because they didn't have all-weather roads. And once they had the all-weather roads, they didn't really need the train, but it meant that people could drive there and hop on the train as a tourist attraction. So it runs once a week. It takes about 5 hours to get between the two towns. It's called a train from nowhere to nowhere, because one town is 1,200 people, the other's 600 people. So it really is a strange, odd little leftover from the 19th century. The Savannah Land is a good one. It goes from Cairns once a week all the way out over 2 days to a place called Forsyth, which used to be a mining town. That's a bit like a rail cruise again, but a budget version where you don't sleep on the train, you just sleep like cabins in caravan parks on the way. And it's very, it's a real sort of pioneer railway kind of vibe. You're the only train on the track after it leaves sort of the environs of Cairns up in the hills there. And you go off to little side trips to caves, and you have a cruise on one of the little gorges there. And it's a great little outback experience. So that's a nice one as well. Queensland's got a few of these. There's Spirit of the Outback as well, which is a regularly scheduled sleeper, which goes from Brisbane to Longreach out in the west of Queensland. And there's plenty of stuff to do out there. That's where Qantas started. There's Qantas Museum, and the dinosaur fossils are a bit further out in Winton. So so Queensland's got a few of these interesting kind of leftover services that are still quite appealing.
Isn't that funny that that's what they've hung on to them? But what it shows, though, talking about that, is that, you can fly between Sydney and Melbourne in 90 minutes if your flight leaves on time. But at a recent conference that we both went to in Sydney, you trained each way, which takes roughly about 10 hours. Why did you choose a train over?
It's 11 hours. It's even longer. But yeah, it's no, I've done it for the last 2 years for this conference because it's on every Feb, as you know, and I just thought, well, partly it's environmental. Even these diesel trains, it's a lot less carbon emissions than a single flight over that distance, and it's something appealing about it. I went up on the day train and came back on the night train. Partly it was a bit cheaper that way, and it was similar to an airfare. I guess it's probably a bit more, but of course you're not paying for that hotel room. In a sense, it's the hotel room plus the fare together that makes a sleeper train good value. And it was quite nice in a way because the last day of the conference was Friday. It was impossible to get a hotel room that night because of Taylor Swift's concerts. And so, I had the day of the conference wound up, we had our post-conference drinks, and then I just rocked around in my own time to put a tram around to Central Station. And because it's a train, right, there's no check-in, there's no security. You could be there 5 minutes before the train pulls into the platform, and that would be fine. You just step aboard, you get going, and eventually the guy comes past and has a look at your ticket. So there is something very appealing about just that informality, I suppose, too, compared with all the jumping through hoops that you have to do with aircraft.
Oh, yeah, I see that really sings to me because I struggle with the hoops on the aircraft, and I do love the fact that you can jump on trains and suddenly you're gone. Although I have to say, if you're in somewhere like Switzerland, if you are not on the train in that second, I've nearly had my fingertips taken off on the train in Zurich. It was like terrifying.
And I think so. You do have to remember that some trains do have security. I did one once. I was in Switzerland seeing a mention, and I had to get from Zurich to London, and foolishly for a minute there, I thought, what flights are there? And then I realised, no, get a train. I went Zurich to Paris in the morning, had a few hours in Paris, interviewed a chef for an article, this Australian chef there, and then caught the afternoon train to London. And there was security, obviously, on that second train. You actually do go through, metal detectors, but it's pretty straightforward. It's still very minimal compared to, getting on an aircraft.
Yeah, I was on the Eurostar recently, going from London to Paris, and there was security in there, but much less onerous than trying to schlep your way out to Heathrow. And that brings a couple of the benefits of train travel, and that is the beautiful stations. As I mentioned, I'm just writing a story at the moment about some of the most gorgeous train stations in Spain. They're astonishing. They're just covered in divine tiles, and then you've got Antwerp, I think, is regarded as the most beautiful train station in the world, isn't it? The cathedral of railway. And
there's some lovely ones in the US. It surprises you really, because you sort of think nowadays, Europe is the great home of railways, but the one in Los Angeles is called the last of the great train stations, Union Station, and it's this wonderful 1939 mashup of Spanish Mission Revival and Art Deco. It's a lovely, lovely building. It's worth just going there just to wander around. So yes, you're right. There is the infrastructure. Have you ever seen a bus station that's appealing? They never are they? I used to work in, I lived in Poland for a while. I traveled around. They've got some lovely train stations. Even when they're a bit grimy, they're still lovely. But the bus stations from the communist era were just horrible. And even the modern ones are always very...
Oh, they're just disgusting. And that actually, I wanted to ask you, what new trends are there coming up in train travel? Are there any new routes that you've got your eye on? Or, something that's going to get the business saying, oh, I really should...
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think we mentioned the big revival of sleeper trains in Europe, partly because of the environmental impact. We sort of, so we call it Greta Thunberg effect, the flight shame effect, And so there are new, just off the top of my head, there's new sleepers coming on. There's a Berlin-Paris sleeper. They haven't had one there for, I think, at least a decade. That's coming back. There are some, going into Eastern Europe. So there are sleeper routes here and there popping up that haven't had a sleeper for many, many years. There's an interesting one I've been keeping my eyes on now for, 7 years. There was a new freight train connecting Eastern Turkey with Georgia, and then on to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan Railways actually literally, this is about 2017, 2018 when it opened, they bought brand new Swiss-made sleeping carriages, and they were going to run a service between Ankara in Turkey via Georgia to Azerbaijan. Wouldn't that be a brilliant sleeper to go on? I assume it'd be about 2 days. I think that would be roughly it. But for some reason, the sleeper hasn't come in. They're running freight on it, but I think the pandemic caused a lot of hassles for everyone around the world with the long distance trains. A lot of them sort of got shut down and haven't come back yet, which is a hassle. So I would love to see that one do its thing. So fingers crossed. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, me too. And the food would be so good. I can't imagine how good the food would be on that trip. It would just be sensational. And what about a couple of tips? Any tips for people wanting to travel by train? Are there booking websites that you live on, like Man and Seat 61 or something like that?
Yeah, he's got a great site. So yeah, the Man Seat 61, a guy called Mark Smith in the UK, really good website where it's a simple website, but he kind of keeps it topped up and updated with how to get, say, to, it's often sort of more focused from the UK, but it works for anywhere. But what's happening in Serbia, or what the train situation is in Portugal, or maybe what trains they have in Egypt. And it's a great first step if you go, hey, I'm going to Egypt, I wonder what trains I could catch. That would be a place you would go and have a bit of a look, and he would have fairly good overview. Trainline.com, that's a great ticketing company. They cover a lot of ticketing for trains. So instead of having to have different bits of paper from different companies, you can often book with them and have your tickets on your app on your phone. Eurail Pass, if we talk about Eurail passes, are still available if you're traveling in Europe. They're on the phone nowadays too. So you basically arrange it all through the pass. You kind of create your own ticket by choosing a route and saying, okay, I'm going to activate that one for today. And so I just did that last year from Portugal across to Serbia. That was a great trip. That was 20 trains of all sorts of different types using the Eurail Pass. So everything from just little local chugging second-class trains to the high speed where you have to pay a supplement on top of the pass. And then right at the end, a really clapped out old sleeper train from Montenegro to Serbia, where you only had to pay €8 as a supplement for a bed, which was brilliant. Had some lovely scenery, very clapped out old train. The bathrooms were not fantastic, but it was just a couchette, those 6 bugs. I was just sharing it with two Americans who were traveling, 2 other travelers, so it wasn't too crowded. So that was a lot of fun. But those passes are good. There are passes here and there. The US has a similar sort of pass on Amtrak, like 10 rides. On memory, it's about $500 for 10 economy seat rides, so that could be appealing. Yeah, so there's lots of options out there, lots of good material online.
Actually, that reminded me, I had heard about, you had mentioned to me in the past about a trend which was individual sleepers as well. Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah. This is talking about this big revival, right? So at the heart of this big sleeper train revival in Europe is Austrian Federal Railways. So this is the Austrian National Railway Company. And they've been really pushing it. And they've now, I think they've started taking delivery. They had new design for sleeper carriages. So they had the usual sort of 4-bed or 6-bed kind of, compartments. But they also had these great little solo compartments, which are a bit like a capsule in a Japanese, capsule hotel, where you've got your bed, a little fold-out tray. You can pull back the door like a roller door kind of arrangement. So you've got that's really appealing, because a lot of people prefer solo travel to having to bunk up with 1 or 2 or 3 other people overnight. In the same compartment, yeah.
If you're doing second class on the Indians, there's 8 people. They just hang you up to the ceilings, and I've travelled on those, and I do remember, having to pretty much strap your passport to your, sticky tape your passport to your body as you're sleeping. But then the other thing too is, especially if, women are travelling alone and things like that, maybe they want to take that extra level of security as well. So that's really fascinating.
It's if your listeners have a look online and do a little search, and you'll find that I remember there's a little 3D kind of video simulation on the Austrian Federal Railway site somewhere saying this is what they'll look like. And they're pretty impressive. So, yeah, I would love to see that kind of thing. I mean, I keep saying it. We could be doing this here. Like we talk about high-speed railways that will never happen, or they should, but they may not. But, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a sleeper train of a better class than the ones we currently have, because they don't have to be fast. They just have to be well scheduled to get you, overnight, enough time to sleep and get you to where you need to go at a reasonable sort of hours. So, this might be the future. At least it's it's a good thing for reducing carbon emissions, which is something, countries should be doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I am all for the high speed. And some people consistently say that it's a pie in the sky idea between Sydney and Melbourne. But I would be a total advocate. You get me on there any day.
There's 11 million people, I would say. There's 5 million Sydney, 5 million Melbourne. There must be another million in between. I mean, if we can't have a viable high speed, when in Europe there are high speeds between city pairs that are much lower population, I can't see.
Tim, I'm really interested to hear what upcoming rail travel that you have planned, because you've already got a couple of books out. Maybe there's another one in the works.
Yeah, the two out at the moment is heading south from Fremantle Press. I did a big round Australia train journey, 8 trains out there, 8,000 kilometres. So that's really a kind of narrative. The other one, Ultimate Train Journeys World, is more of a coffee table book. We know details of 30 great train journeys around the world, lots of nice photos as well. So I'm hoping to follow up on those. Possibly I could do a follow-up in Australia with some of the rail journeys in country, Queensland and New South Wales that I didn't include in the first book. I think that would be really good. Ultimate Train Journeys could extend it to focus on Europe or North America, so that would be nice. Otherwise, I've got a bunch of other trips coming up, including some lesser-known rail journeys in Switzerland, ones that they're not as famous as the Glacier Express. That should be fun. I hope you get to New Zealand. They've got a new kind of meal service on their Auckland to Wellington train. That's something I'm hoping to do soon. And also might get up to Queensland. There's Spirit of the Outback train goes to Longreach. There's a few the company doing some rail excursions from Longreach. I'm hoping to get out there as well. So there's a few possible things in the works.
There's a book in all of us, but you seem to have more than most. Now, I've got my last question, which is the question that we ask all our guests, which is, what is your most bizarre travel experience? And it doesn't have to be one related with trains, although you do get an extra gold star if it is.
This one's only vaguely related, but yes, I've written about this. It was some years ago. Like I mentioned, I lived in Poland for a while. I've been back a few times doing jobs there for Lonely Planet, researching their guidebooks, updating the Poland chapter or the Poland book. And there was one time I was up in the mountains, because the south of Poland, the border with Slovakia, is very mountainous. And I was up in the mountains, actually catching a bus between two places. I think I would have got a train to the first stop. And it was still snowy. I think it was about March, but winter was sort of hanging on. And I was just sort of slumped there in the bus, and these two guys got on. And then the guy starts talking to me. One of the guys, is a little bit rough, and he's talking to me. And in Polish, he's saying, buy me beer, beer at the next stop. I don't know what he was thinking, give me money, whatever. And I just said in Polish, why? Thinking that might help. He was a bit aggressive. It was a bit strange. And then his friends who spoke a bit of English sort of went, "Oh, that's okay. He's just come out of prison." And I went, "Oh, that's all right then." So he's going home for the first time by bus. Going out to his family. So he's it's not in a great mood. And I was feeling he was a little bit aggressive. Like I was just sort of thinking, I don't really want to be hanging out with these guys when we get to the destination, because we're all going to the same, final stop. So I just kind of got myself ready, and I kind of had my bag with me, and I kind of just got off the bus quite quickly at the end and just went over the overpass to the adjoining train station. There's the train connection, and I just sort of darted into the city. I didn't want to hang around and go for a beer drinking, buying expedition with these guys. But so that was just a little bit edgy, but I imagine it wasn't a big deal really.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Okay, well, I'm glad you stepped out of that one and you're able to join us back here. Thank you so much for joining us on The World Awaits. And we look forward to reading more about your work in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. We're going to put a link in the show notes to it. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
No problems. And it's always good to talk about trains.
If you want to hear more from travel journalist and train buff Tim Richards, follow his travels at iwriter.com.au. Next week, we're chatting about how to hack your airline bookings with points whisperer Chris Chamberlain of Points Hacks and travel booking expert Mark Trim of Complex Travel Group.
And we love to hear from our listeners, so please leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Click on our profile, scroll down to the bottom to leave a star rating. And if you're on Spotify, go to our main page and click the 3 dots underneath our photo, or simply drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au. Thanks for joining us on the World Awaits Summer Series. See you next time.